This bobcat was about to be put down. Now he sleeps on the couch. The fluorescent lights of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor as Dr. Sarah Chun approached the steel cage in the corner. Inside, a magnificent bobcat crouched low, his tufted ears pressed flat against his skull, amber eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and defiance. The paperwork on her clipboard told a grim story. Severe injuries from a vehicle strike, partial blindness in his left eye, and a damaged rear leg that would never fully heal. The recommendation was clear. Euthanasia was the most humane option. "Hey there, big guy," Sarah whispered, crouching down to meet his gaze. The bobcat, who the staff had named Ranger, didn't flinch, but something in those golden eyes made her pause. Despite his injuries, despite the fear and trauma, there was an unmistakable spark of will to live. Sarah had been a wildlife veterinarian for 15 years, and she'd made the difficult decision to euthanize countless animals when their quality of life couldn't be restored. But something about Ranger was different. His injuries, while serious, weren't necessarily life-threatening. The real issue was that he could never be released back into the wild, a death sentence for most wild animals in captivity. That evening, Sarah found herself sitting in her kitchen, staring at Ranger's file. Her husband Mark looked up from his laptop, recognizing the expression on her face. "You're thinking about bringing another one home, aren't you?" he said with a knowing smile. Sarah and Mark lived on 20 acres outside the city, and over the years, their property had become an unofficial sanctuary for animals that couldn't be released, but didn't deserve to die. They had proper permits, spacious enclosures, and most importantly, endless patience and love. "He's special, Mark. I can't explain it, but there's something about him that just—" She trailed off, unable to find the words. Mark closed his laptop and moved to sit beside his wife. "Show me." The next morning, they drove to the rehabilitation center together. Ranger was huddled in the same corner, but when Sarah approached, his ears pricked up slightly. Mark observed quietly as Sarah spoke in soft tones, noting how the bobcat's breathing seemed to calm in her presence. "The enclosure by the oak grove should work," Mark said finally. "We'll need to modify it for his mobility issues, add some lower perches, maybe a heated shelter for his joints." The process of bringing Ranger home took weeks of paperwork, veterinary clearances, and careful preparation. The large enclosure they prepared was more like a natural habitat than a cage. Trees for climbing, a small stream, hidden caves, and multiple levels accessible even with his limited mobility. But Ranger had other plans. On his third day at the sanctuary, Sarah discovered him sitting calmly outside his enclosure. The lock was secure, the fencing intact. Somehow, despite his injuries, he'd found a way out. Instead of fleeing, he was simply sitting in the morning sun, watching the house. "That's impossible," Mark muttered, examining the enclosure from every angle. They reinforced potential weak spots and returned Ranger to his habitat. By evening, he was out again, this time closer to the house, lying peacefully under the porch light. This pattern continued for a week. No matter what they did, Ranger found ways to escape, but he never ran. He just gradually moved closer to the house, as if he was making a choice about where he wanted to be. Sarah began leaving food for him wherever he chose to settle, and gradually, she started sitting nearby while he ate. Ranger never approached her directly, but he didn't retreat either. Slowly, the distance between them decreased. The breakthrough came during a thunderstorm in late autumn. Sarah woke to find Ranger pressed against the sliding glass door, his fur soaked and eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, she opened the door. He limped inside, shook once, and settled on the rug by the fireplace, as if he'd lived there his entire life. "Sarah," Mark whispered from the top of the stairs, "there's a wild bobcat in our living room." "I know," she whispered back. and he's staying. What followed was a gradual integration that defied every expectation Sarah had about wild felines. Ranger seemed to understand that this was his home now, and he adapted with remarkable intelligence. He learned to use a large litter box they set up in the mudroom. He discovered that the sunny spot by the bay window was perfect for afternoon naps. Most surprisingly, he began following Sarah around the house like an oversized, spotted dog. The first time Sarah woke to find Ranger curled up at the foot of their bed, she nearly cried. This magnificent wild creature, who should have been prowling through forests, had chosen to trust them completely. His presence wasn't just tolerated, it was welcomed, celebrated, cherished. Ranger's daily routine became as predictable as any house cat's, albeit on a larger scale. Mornings began with breakfast in his designated feeding area, followed by supervised outdoor time in a secure portion of the yard. He loved to sun himself on the deck, watch birds from the screened porch, and occasionally stalk Mark's gardening efforts with intense fascination. Evenings were reserved for what Sarah came to think of as couch time. After dinner, Ranger would leap onto his favorite spot on the sectional sofa, a corner cushion that bore the permanent impression of his body. He'd stretch out, sometimes spanning nearly the entire length of the couch, and purr with a rumbling intensity that vibrated through the whole room. Visitors were initially terrified, but Ranger seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of human behavior. He was gentle with children, respectful of elderly guests, and had an uncanny ability to provide comfort to anyone who was sad or stressed. Sarah's colleague once broke down crying during a difficult visit, and Ranger simply walked over and rested his massive head on her lap until she felt better. The local news eventually picked up Ranger's story. Bobcat scheduled for euthanasia, now living his best life, read the headline, accompanied by photos of Ranger lounging on the couch, wearing a custom-made collar, looking for all the world like he was posing for a magazine spread. But for Sarah and Mark, the media attention was just noise. What mattered was the quiet evening moments when Ranger would settle between them on the couch, his purr creating a peaceful soundtrack to their nights. What mattered was watching this incredible creature who had been written off as hopeless now thriving in ways no one could have predicted. 2 years after that fateful day at the rehabilitation center, Sarah often reflected on the decision that changed all their lives. Ranger had taught her that sometimes the most unconventional solutions create the most extraordinary outcomes. He'd proven that wildness doesn't always mean untamable, and that love can bridge even the most unlikely species gaps. As she watched him now, sprawled across his beloved couch cushions in a patch of afternoon sunlight, Sarah smiled. The paperwork had recommended euthanasia for a wild animal who couldn't survive in captivity. But Ranger had never been meant for mere survival. He'd been meant for this, a life filled with warmth, safety, and unconditional love, sleeping peacefully on a couch where he was not just accepted, but treasured. Sometimes the best rescues are the ones that rescue the rescuers right back.